Hi, Chris Bench for Hello College. I'm a professional essay coach. It is my job to help students from across the academic spectrum to craft essays that will help them get into the colleges of their dreams. Today, I want to talk about essay topics to maybe not to avoid exactly, but to reconsider, to think hard about whether or not you really want to address these particular topics when you set down to write your Common App personal statement. Probably the most common of these to address is essays having to do with mental health. We actually have a whole video on that. If that is something that you're thinking about, I want to encourage you to Google our discussing mental health issues in your college essay. That will be able to give you all sorts of in-depth information, even beyond the depth that we're going to address our other topics here. But today I want to run through a number of other different topics that you might be thinking about, including sports entries, mission trips, what we call trips of privilege, fancy vacations, divorce, death, and essays that are sort of autobiographies. So taking it just from the top of that list, sports injuries. This is maybe the most common topic that students choose to write about when they sit down to write their college essays. So maybe you tore your ACL, or you had a shoulder injury or whatever over the course of your sports career. You might have had to go through surgery for it. You probably went through months of PT afterwards. It was a huge time commitment for you to get yourself back into shape. Maybe you never even actually got back into shape. Maybe it was something that just cut your sports career off entirely. It's a huge experience for most students to go through when they have a serious sports injury, and so it makes a lot of sense that you might want to write about it. In fact, it makes so much sense that virtually everybody that has had one of these sort of career-shaping, sports career-shaping injuries chooses to write about it. And that right there is the problem. All of these stories, and there are a lot of them, they all kind of look the same. I probably hit a lot of the major features of your experience already. You had this injury. Usually the essays start by describing that injury. Snap, I couldn't believe the sound that I just heard was the cracking of my own femur or something. It can start off a little gruesome. It's a good way to get somebody's attention, but where it goes from there probably isn't going to hold your reader's attention, because where it goes from there is you probably have some surgery, you struggle to recover from that, you go through a whole lot of physical therapy, you repeat the same exercises over and over and over again, because that's what you do in physical therapy. And eventually you, if you're lucky, if things go well, you get back into condition and you're able to go out and perform at the sport or the activity that you really enjoy so much. Or perhaps if you're not so lucky, you have to start making different decisions. And it's actually in the case of those latter sort of different decisions essays that situations where these essays can take off. If it is just a matter of you going through physical therapy and just sort of following all of your physical therapist's advice and direction, that's great. It is wonderful that you did that, but you're not making a lot of the choices along the way. You're kind of just following direction. You're doing as you're told. Props to you. It takes perseverance and dedication, but you're just following the program. Instead, you want to look to situations where you have a little bit more agency in the matter. You want to focus on situations where you do a thing, not where the thing happens to you. Which is where essays where maybe you can't actually go back to performing in the sport that you really love can be more interesting, because maybe you find different outlets. You go off and you start coaching and you find out that you love working with little kids, or you take up a completely different sport or activity. We get to see you changing and adapting to circumstances. Those can make for really good essays, especially if they point to somewhere that your life goes, a whole different direction. Hey, now I'm really interested. I want to be an elementary school teacher because I found out how much I love coaching 8-year-olds. Now I want to teach second grade or something. So sports injuries, be careful. If it's just a standard sports injury, it's not a bad topic per se. It just looks a lot like everybody else's essay on the same topic. Make sure that you choose a situation where you're going to have a lot of agency in the story that you tell. As for our second topic to think hard about, mission trips. Mission trips, so these are stories where usually students will be encountering oftentimes extreme poverty for the first time in their lives. It can be a really, really significant experience in students' lives. May not have ever really seen people who were tremendously poor in a way that is sometimes hard to encounter outside of the United States. Can really change your perspective on your place in the world. And all of those things are can be life-altering experiences. The problem is that the odds are very good that they look a lot like everybody else's life-altering experiences in a similar situation, especially if your engagement with those people only lasts for the course of that mission trip. So you're there for a week or 2 weeks. You help to build a basketball court or maybe a pavilion or something to eat in. That's wonderful. That's great. But we don't see you engaging with it on a sustained basis. We don't see you changing as a result of that. Now, if you had that experience and you went off and you founded a nonprofit, you keep going back to the same place year after year, you have a correspondence with some of the people that you meet, so you've developed deep relationships and you write to each other every week and you're on WhatsApp texting each other all the time. Cool, that's great. That's a great topic to write about. You just want to make sure that you're not just sort of dropping in and then flying out, doing your couple of weeks of penance for coming from a first world nation, and then going back to your comfortable life. We want to see sustained engagement. And without that sustained engagement, it's going to be hard to make this essay stand out from other people who have gone on sort of similar mission trip experiences. Trips of privilege, these are fancy vacations. Like I love travel. I couldn't be more happy for you that your family went on that fancy safari to Africa, that you got to go swimming in the Great Barrier Reef before it shriveled up due to climate change. That's great for you. You probably didn't plan that vacation. You almost certainly did not pay for that vacation. You want to make sure, again, that you're not just along for the ride on these stories. So don't tell us about seeing the Great Barrier Reef start to shrivel up before your eyes and how that made you want to do something about climate change. Tell us about what you did to affect climate change. Tell us about how you convinced your school to get rid of its last incandescent light bulbs and change over to, high efficiency LEDs. Tell us about how you convinced your parents to get an electric car. Tell us about how you started going around and collecting garbage in your community just as a community cleanup exercise. Tell us about those things that you did, in your own community, in your own life, rather than that 1 week where you got to go off and have a nice trip. Death. Obviously death is a big topic. It makes perfect sense that if you're looking for something important in your life to touch on, that what might be the single most important fact of life, the fact that it is finite, would be something that you would think of in this situation. The trouble with this is it becomes real hard not to make that essay about the person that you lost and to keep the focus on yourself. And, so tell a story here. When my grandmother passed, she was a family matriarch. It tore my family to pieces. My dad no longer talks to my aunt and uncle. It all went to pot in the end. It was a really traumatic experience for all of us. But it wasn't my story. It was not even my aunt and uncle and dad's story, right? It was my grandmother's story. It was her story about confronting the end of her life, about suffering through cancer, about making peace with the decisions that she had made over the course of her time on this planet. My part in that was very small. It is possible that your part in the death of a loved one is larger, but if this just becomes a story about how wonderful your grandmother is, how indebted she was to her community, or how indebted she was, or how much she cared about her community, how she was somebody who constantly, whenever a neighbor was going through a tough time, she'd show up with a casserole or with a cooler full of bao or some dal or whatever, she just wanted to feed the people around her, to support the people around her. Tell us how that inspired you to do the same, how after her passing you started volunteering at the local soup kitchen, how during the pandemic you caught the sourdough baking craze and you started baking loaves of bread for all of your neighbors. Tell us about the things that you did as a result of being inspired by that person's passing. And we're going to feel that inspiration so much more. If you say, hey, I was inspired by my grandmother, but then you can't point to anything that you did as a result of that inspiration, it's hard to look at that and say, hey, this inspiration really took. So make sure that you can point to stuff in your own life, actions that you have taken, rather just than those of the person who's passed. Finally, autobiographies. Your Common App personal statement is 650 words. A lot of times kids think that they gotta start when their first ancestor crawled out of the ocean and made it onto dry land for the first time and give you everything on down there. Every little detail. Here's the day of my birth. Here's my first memory. Here's, the blanket I wrapped myself in as a child, as a small child, as a toddler or whatever. If you try to squeeze your entire life into 650 words, you're going to fail. You can't do it. Your life is more interesting than a page and a quarter of Times New Roman. In particular, you're gonna fail because that essay is gonna go every which direction. There's too much detail in your life. Your life has too many different features in it for you to manage to tell a coherent story if you're just including absolutely everything. Now, sometimes the general shape of a life can communicate a single theme. If your dream is to be an architect, and it's because when you were a little kid you moved from home to home, you were a military brat maybe, and so your family moved you from base to base when you were a small child, and so you constantly saw different homes, you lived in different places, and so you really came to appreciate the physical structures that you were in, and you tell us about all those different houses that you lived in growing up and how they changed the way that you view architecture, that you view buildings. Hey, now that's an autobiography that communicates something important about you, some one thing important about you. But if you try to squeeze your entire life in there, it's just going to be a mishmash. It's going to be a stew. And I like stew as much as the next guy. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, made a delicious one. But we want to make sure that we have something that's gonna cut through all the details of life to present a singular story, something that's going to be a little bit spicier. And so make sure that your autobiography, if you do choose that to tell your entire life story, that it's a life story that's told through a very narrow window so that it focuses on a single theme. Thank you so very much. My name is Chris Bench again, essay coach for Hello College. You have a great day and good luck.